Hello, everybody. Welcome to our last workshop of the year. As people are slowly joining in, we are going to be beginning our workshop. And as you know, my name is Chulu. I am with ACA, and I am not alone. And as per usual, I am with Michelle. Michelle, would you like to say hi?
Everyone.
Hello, Michelle. Okay, so this week we are going to be discussing why international conferences on issues of justice are important, and this happens at the backdrop of a lot of happenings that are a lot of things that are happening around the world. As we know, the war inflicted upon Palestinians by Israel, what is going on in Congo, the war in Sudan, and a lot of other things that are happening around the world that are issues of justice and are issues of human rights. And so we felt that it is important that we have such a talk. Just a bit of a disclaimer that the concepts and ideas that we are going to be discussing in this workshop can be workshopped on their own. And so please do extensive research after the workshop and also in preparation for a dialogue that is happening on Wednesday. And please do understand that these are very broad concepts, and the things that are spoken about and that we're going to be speaking English. What is happening to my English today? But in any case, um, the things that we're going to be speaking about in the workshop, you can always do extensive research on and find out more, because we know that ACA is not the end all be all of climate talk. Okay, right. So let's do a bit of a check-in as we usually do. We just want to find out how are you arriving today, and we are going to do a movie check-in. Last time we did an animal check-in, so we're trying to do exciting things, at least in these workshops. So we're going to do a movie check-in, just to describe how you're arriving today. And so if a movie could describe how you feel as we come close to ending the year, what movie would that be and why would it be that movie? And that will sort of describe how you are arriving today. You can pop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and then unmute. But I will start, and then following person can go after that. How am I arriving today? I'm not really a movies person, so I think I would say that I am arriving today as the Princess Switcheroo, which is a very goofy and dorky movie. Um, it's about like a person who is identical to a princess, and they basically switch lives with the princess because the princess is tired of their life, and they're obviously tired of their life of being a povo, so they switch places. So I'd say I'm feeling a bit like that. Sometimes I feel like I've switched places so with someone else, and sometimes I just feel like a lot is happening and I wish I could do that. And that's how I'm arriving. So let's just see in the chat how are people arriving. You can also unmute and let us know how you are arriving today. Okay. Hello guys, I'm Alphonse from Kenya. Hello Alphonse. We see you there. How are you arriving today? How are you feeling? And if it could be a movie, which movie would it be? I see today that we have like quite a quiet bunch, Michelle, and I'm guessing it's the exhaustion, and that end of year sort of fatigue that we all feeling, and everyone just wants to be, quiet and sit back and listen, and that's something we all feeling. We all feeling very tired. It's been a very long year and it's still going on. That's the other thing, that the year is still going on even though it's been like a very long one. So we all just very tired, and I'm understanding of that today. So I'm not going to be coming for people and go down the participants list and be like, how are you feeling, Lucy? How are you feeling, Kulu? How are you feeling? Because of the understanding that it's been like a really tough year. It's been hectic, it's been long. Also Lucy's checking in from Kenya. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot there, make an example with your name. Michelle, do you want to check in quickly for us before we go on?
Pause. So if I were a movie, I feel like I would probably be Men in Black, and I'll tell you why. Not because of all the exciting alien stuff, but because of that one gadget that they use to wipe people's memories. I just feel like I need a blank new start, and I'm so excited for the new year to start. I'm even more excited for this year to end because exactly what you were describing, there's a lot of exhaustion around this time of the year. And I'm like, blank page, please. I want to start afresh as a new person with no memories of this year because of how much of a year it's been. Yeah.
It's been quite
And
a
I
year.
think,
It's been quite a year. Mm-hmm.
yeah, if anyone else wants to check in, even in the chat throughout, maybe you think of a movie that comes to you, you're more than welcome to pop it in the chat as well.
Yeah. And when we get a chance again to go through the chat, we'll go through those movies. I'm also hoping that I can get some nice movie suggestions from how people are feeling, so that I can have a couple of stuff to watch during the holidays. But in any case, let us first, before we jump into it, let's go through our rules of engagement. Please raise your hand if you have a question. So don't just go on unmuting and speaking. Just please raise your hand and give everyone that courtesy of raising your hand and letting people know that you would like to say something, just so to maintain the decorum of the space. And please practice the rule of two. So that is to allow two people to speak before you contribute again. So if, for example, I speak and I give my contribution, and Michelle speaks and they give their contribution, and let's say Alphonse gives their contribution, I can then contribute again. So I must at least allow two people before I talk. This is, of course, the exception of me, because I'm going to be going on for quite a while before people will get another chance to talk. But please practice the rule of two. I will also, in mediating and in facilitating the space, try to maintain that. Please feel free also to use your home language. And the hope is that there is someone in the room that can translate for us. And if we fail in that regard, we will then try to use Google Translate. And we know that there are limitations with using Google Translate and all of that. But you are more than welcome to use your home language to communicate. And we're hoping that there will be someone in the room that will be able to translate for us. And one last thing, you are more than welcome to use the chat throughout the discussions and throughout the workshop. And just please note that we're using English as a primary language of communication in this space, just to make things easier in terms of communication. But like I said, feel free to use your home language if you don't feel like using English, or some things are getting lost in translation, because some things are not as expressed as nicely as they would be in our home languages. So please do that, but remember that we try and use English to accommodate everyone. Okay. Like I said, in today's workshop, we will be discussing the importance of international conferences on issues of justice, and why are these conferences important, and what do they deliver, and how can they be used? Are they being used in any way? Do they remain relevant? And those kinds of things. And so just to contextualize a bit, regional and international conferences have been taking place around issues of justice for years now. If we're speaking of the feminist movement, a lot of people will be speaking of Beijing 95, the 1995 conference that happened in Beijing around issues that are faced with women, across the world, particularly in your so-called um, third world countries. So regional and international conferences around issues of justice have been taking place for years and years and years. And even the way these big organizations like your United Nations or your African Union they were formed as a result of international conferences and people coming together and seeing that there is an issue that needs to be spoken to, or issues that need to be spoken to. And they often concern justice and human rights and reparations and that kind of stuff. And in this month's installment of workshops, we'll be discussing and unpacking the importance of international conferences on issues of justice. And we will particularly be discussing the Africa Climate Summit and the Conference of the Parties 28, known as COP28. And this is happening at the backdrop, like I said, of a lot of things that are happening across the continent and across the world that we're seeing that are issues of, human rights, issues of justice, social justice, climate justice, economic and financial justice, political justice, and so on. So with a lot of these issues that are happening, there is the COP28 conference that is coming up. And this final Back to Basics workshop for 2023 comes at a time where activists are organizing and mobilizing towards the Conference of the Parties, which is COP28, that will be happening in the United Arab Emirates later this year, sometime in December. So like I said, this comes at a backdrop of a lot of things. And so we felt that it is important that we then discuss how are these conferences relevant to the issues that we're faced with on a day-to-day basis in our lives and in our lived experiences, and especially regional and international conferences, and how can those be harnessed, if they can be harnessed in any way, to improve our living conditions as people going on about our daily lives. Okay, so the first that we're going to be discussing is the Africa Climate Summit, and we will be discussing what is the Africa Climate Summit, what are some of the objectives there, and what were some of the things, the Africa Climate Summit was looking into when it happened. It happened in September around Africa Climate Week. And just to understand what is the Africa Climate Summit, it is a meeting of African states that are trying to pave a way for discussion around the impacts of climate change in Africa, and just really trying to discuss a lot of issues around, trying to pave a way for debt restructuring, as we know that a lot of African countries are in debt with the IMF and the World Bank. And so just trying to look at debt reconstruction and ways to finance, moving forward and fighting climate change for African states, and also what are the key points for African states to be looking at. So a huge part of the focus of the Africa Climate Summit this year was in adaptation for Africa, and how is Africa contributing to climate change, and how are we as Africa fighting climate change as the different states in Africa. And so the aims were to look at the financing part of Africa, looking at the debt reconstruction, looking at our fossil fuels and our carbon footprint and how to reduce that. And this year's Africa Climate Summit, its way was paved by COP27, which is a conference of the parties, conference that happened last year that paved the way for this year's Africa Climate Summit. And so a lot of the things that were discussed in the Africa Climate Summit were resolutions that came out of COP27, and in what ways was then Africa affected, and in what ways was Africa playing a role in the decisions that were made. And so who are the members who were able to attend the Africa Climate Summit? So all 55 AU member states were invited to attend the Africa Climate Summit, and they are invited to be part of the Africa Climate Week that happens annually. Even the Africa Climate Summit is a conference that happens annually. And so the purpose and aim really of the Africa Climate Summit is to deliver innovative green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. But a huge focus of it is in Africa, in how does Africa finance its fight against climate change, and in trying to innovate green solutions and green sustainable solutions and growth for the continent, and then from the continent with an outlook of into the world, right? And the next conference that we are going to be talking about is the Conference of the Parties, which is the COP conferences. I spoke of COP27, which was the Conference of the Parties that happened for the 27th time. And now we are going to be discussing COP28, which is a Conference of the Parties that will be happening for the 28th time, right? So just a bit of context, what is COP? COP is an annual United Nations climate meeting where governments get together to discuss how to limit and to prepare for climate change. So it has, in a sense, the same objectives for coming together. It is to discuss climate change, which is the same objective as the Africa Climate Summit. And this is also because the Africa Climate Summit draws a lot of direction from COP, right? So they both have the same sort of composition in terms of what it is that they are and what they're meant to be doing, which is for governments to come together around the world in the case of COP, and around Africa in the case of the Africa Climate Summit, to then say, how do we limit and prepare for climate change? And who are the parties then? Because it's talking about the Conference of the Parties. Who are the parties that are part of this conference? It is 198 parties, including all member states of the UN. So as you know, that the United Nations has member states, so countries that are members of the UN. And so it is all members of the UN, plus some other countries who are not part of the UN. But in total, it is 198 parties, which also to the great part and to a great extent is countries, and they form part of what we call the Conference of the Parties, or COP. And the purpose and aim of COP is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous human-induced interference with the climate system. So we know, or we've heard of how human beings, our human activity has raised greenhouse concentrations in our atmosphere, and as a result, that is hurting our ozone layer, you know. And so the purpose and aim of COP is, how do we stabilize those greenhouse gas emissions and thus concentrations in our atmosphere to be at a level that would then prevent the dangerous interference that is happening to the climate system. And obviously this dangerous impact and interference to the climate system, a huge part of it is human induced. And human induced interference basically refers to all human activities that are impacting on the climate system and the environment. So when we're speaking of human induced, we're just basically speaking of human activities that have then impacted or interfered with the climate system. And that basically is what the Conference of the Parties is, and what their aim and purpose is, of which the African Climate Summit also really aligns with, because they then come together and discuss some of the stuff that were resolutions that they formed part of, and then contextualize that and bring it to the context of Africa. And so what is the focus and the themes, the talking points or the commissions of COP28 this year? So COP28 will be focusing on cutting fossil fuels for one. A lot of countries during COP27, which was the previous conference before COP28, which was last year, they had agreed that they're going to be cutting down on coal, but they had not made any commitments to be cutting down on other fossil fuels. So COP28 this year is going to be looking at who has stuck to their commitments of cutting down on coal, and also then discuss cutting down on other fossil fuels like oil and gas and other non-renewables. So that is the first and foremost thing that is the focus and theme of COP28 this year. It is cutting down on fossil fuels because, as we know, the science is telling us that we need to cut down, not even cut down, we need to stop using fossil fuels. We need to stop, not even cut down, which is then a segue to the second theme and focus of COP28, which is technologies to tackle gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And these technologies are technologies that are being primarily pushed for by countries whose resources are fossil fuels like oil, crude oil, gas, coal, and so on. And so what these technologies are meant to do, in a sense, is to trap fossil fuel greenhouse gases, pardon me. So the purpose of these technologies is to trap greenhouse gases, and instead of these gases being released into our atmosphere, they are then trapped into an underground system where they are kept and suppressed. This has been a conversation that has been going on for a number of years, but the science is not agreeing with the logic at this point in time, because the science is saying that you need to completely stop fossil fuels. And the logic of the people who are still holding on to fossil fuels is basically saying, well, we can try and use these technologies that are going to capture these gases and keep them underneath. But these technologies have been found to be very ineffective and to not work at all at times. And at the times they have worked, they have only worked to a maximum of 10%. So there's none of these technologies that have done way more than the 10%. So it is not really much of a solution, these technologies. And this is one of the things that COP is going to be discussing. It is to bring forward these technologies. And it is up to us then, as people who are going to be affected by all of these decisions that are going to be made, to then evaluate and see, do these technologies work? Are they going to work? Have they been working? And in reality of the matter is that they have not been working. And once again, we are brought smoke screens and mirrors of supposed solutions that are not really solutions, right? The other focus and theme of COP24 for this year is COP28, sorry, for this year is going to be boosting clean energy capacity. So we've been talking a lot about building capacity in our workshops for the past year. And so capacity, as we have, unearthed in our past workshop, is the ability to do something. It is to have that ability to do something. And so when we're talking about boosting clean energy capacity, that means we are trying to build our reserves of clean energy. And clean energy is renewable energy that is not coming from fossil fuels like oil and gas and coal, right? So COP28 will be talking about how do we then boost our clean energy capacity? How do we build that capacity and make sure that we have clean energy and we start using that clean energy, and as a result, start moving away from fossil fuels and, well, dirty energy, right? And then the last theme that COP28 will be focusing on is financing the cost of climate change. This is particularly a big one for Africa, and this is also something that was discussed in the Africa Climate Summit. It was one of the themes. How do we finance the cost of climate change? COP28 will be bringing this conversation to the fore. And so it is also that time for us to say, well, it can be financed in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way, right? As we know that there are great costs that come with climate change. There's a lot of adaptation that needs to happen when there's climate emergencies. There is a lot of transitioning that needs to be made, and we need to make sure that transitioning is a just transition and is not just any kind of transition. And so a lot of financing will then be needed. So how do we then finance this? And obviously, in the context of Africa, it's important that we start thinking along the lines of we have been doing a lot of loaning money, going out there to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and asking for loan. And is that something that is sustainable for African states? Do we see it as being sustainable? Does it have a history of being sustainable, as we are still dealing as a continent with a lot of debt that is owed to the World Bank and the IMF? And the conversation around that being a just or unjust debt is a conversation that we can have another day. But the thing that we really should be thinking about is, are African states in a place where they can go out and ask for loans from the likes of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund? And if so, how do then they build their own reserves to finance the cost of climate change, which is one of the things that the African Climate Summit was also trying to deal with this year in September at the African Climate Summit. Okay, so why then is advocacy around COP28 important, you know? And we have tried to list like a couple of reasons why COP28 advocacy around COP28 is important. We've listed 3, and obviously there's a lot more than the 3 that we have listed, right? One, advocacy around COP28 is important because COP28 is where decision makers and state leaders meet. So this makes it a prime opportunity for people to have their voices heard, because you have all of these people who are the decision makers and who lead our countries and who lead, society in different pockets of the world, and they come together to make decisions. So it's a prime opportunity for us to mobilize and organize and amplify our voice, so that at the time they're sitting together and they're making decisions, they hear our voices, and hopefully they are guided through what sort of decisions they need to make. The second reason is international relations, right? So when we think of international relations, we're thinking of foreign policies, international agreements, in as much as it is countries that are meeting, but also multinational corporations are meeting, and different people are being held responsible or supposed to be held responsible for the agreements that they form part of, right? For agreements that they ratified and form part of. So because policies and international agreements happen at conferences like COP28, it is an opportunity for us, for me and you, to be able to hold both businesses and governments accountable to agreements they form part of. So if, for example, a Shell was held responsible by the government of Nigeria in COP28, and Shell is part of a ratification that says, well, as Shell, I recognize, for example, the damage that I've done to this and that region of Nigeria in trying to plunder their oil resources. And these are the sort of reparations that I am going to, be giving back to the people of Nigeria. And I will decrease my greenhouse gas emissions by this and this and that and that and that. And this is just an example. In that example, we are then able to say the following year, when we meet again at the conference of the parties, we're able to, as you and me, people on the street, to say, well, Shell said that they're going to do this. And so it is important that they be held responsible. And that back and forth of that usually happens, that, oh, well, Shell is not a Kenyan company, it's a British company, or it's an American company. It makes it super easy, because the president then of Kenya is there, for example, and the foreign minister of Kenya is there, the president of the United States of America is there, and the foreign minister is there. So both parties are there, and they can be able to sort things like that out. So it gives room for accountability and for people to try and hold accountable, the different parties who are in the conference. And lastly, it is to make demands. Because these people come together and we know our governments hardly ever listen to us, it is a prime place for us to be able to make our demands, to come and say, this is what we want, this is what we want from the government of Uganda, for example, and we want the world to hold the government of Uganda responsible for this. We want the people of Uganda to know that the world is hearing their cries and that type of stuff. So it is a great platform to come out and make people-centered demands, right? And this brings us to the next part of this conversation. We've been speaking about, advocacy. And of course, a great part of it has been education as we're having this workshop. And we spoke about the importance of advocacy around, conferences like COP. And as we said in the beginning of this, conversation and discussion, that COP28 is happening in December. And a lot of young people and a lot of activists and a lot of people are coming together and trying to send out messages to COP28. And the African Climate Alliance is also trying to do that. So we're going to have a little breakaway session for about 20 minutes where you will be put in groups. And what you're supposed to be thinking about in those groups is that if you could say one thing to the leaders of COP28, what would you say? If you could say one thing to the leaders at COP28, what would you say? So we'll break away into groups, and each group will have about 20 minutes to write a message to COP. So please make sure that this message is written and you don't lose it, because when you go to breakaway rooms, the chat that you see in this plenary session, you won't see there. When you come back from breakaway rooms, that chat will be gone. So also don't write the message in your chat in the breakaway room. One participant should scribe it out maybe on their notepad on their phone. If they have a phone, just please make sure that there is a participant that will write down the message that you decide on as a group. And then that message, you will be sent a link in the chat box. And that message you will then post up into the Google form that is on there. And it is part of the Messages to COP28 digital campaign that the African Climate Alliance is part of in partnership with Project 90. And these are messages that are going to be taken to COP28. And these are messages about the situation in our countries and our lived experiences of climate change. So if you could say one thing about your lived experiences of climate change, what you have seen other people go through, what you have gone through, the situation in your country, the situation in neighboring countries, and the situation you've seen around you and in the news. If you could say one thing to leaders at COP28 about what you have seen, what would you say? So please write that down, and you will, let me just quickly show you what you will be seeing. So the link that you will be given will take you to a form like this. And here you are going to write the first names of the people in your group. And then here on last name, you're going to write the last names of the people in your group separated by commas. And then you're going to write your countries separated by commas. And then you are going to write your message here. And then you are going to click on submit. Please keep the message, because when we come back to plenary, we are going to be sharing our messages that we have submitted to COP, and then we will round up our session after that. So let me just quickly stop sharing my screen so that we can try and separate you into breakaway groups. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your experiences and also the messages you would like COP28 to heed and hear. They're very important. It's important that we have our voices heard, and the problems that we experiencing, in our communities, a solution for them is found. And it is in big platforms like these that we have to express ourselves and be heard. And so just to conclude for today's workshop, we started with the question, why are international conferences on issues of justice important? And today, I think we all realize that they do have a role to play. You know, it's important that world leaders come together and discuss the issues that are bothering the world, and particularly with the climate change issue. You know, it is an issue that has potential to end the world as we know it. So it's important then that world leaders come together and discuss these issues, and that's exactly the kind of role that international and regional conferences um, play. Another role they play is actually been exhibited in what we just did now in trying to amplify our voices, you know, and getting our voices heard by international and world leaders, that this is the stuff that we are experiencing. These are the demands that we have. These are the things that we'd like you to focus on, because these are the things that are primary and not secondary to us. And that is the kind of role and the kind of importance that international conferences play. And as activists and as people on the ground, we can harness this to use it to give us a voice and to give us a platform, you know, to put our grievances out there, to put the solutions that we have about our own conditions out there. You know, because at times world leaders and governments think they have all the solutions in the world, but it is actually people who live through these conditions and through these issues every day that will have the solutions and that will know how these things are meant to be dealt with and how do we move forward from that. And the exercise that we just did now and contributing to the hashtag messages to COP28 digital campaign proves that we have the solutions. We know what is needed to be done, and we just need a platform to be able to amplify our voices and tell our leaders what is needed to be done and hold them accountable. I'm hearing a lot of accountability being sought, you know, from the different groups that, well, there are certain things that you agreed to, there are certain things that you committed that you were going to do, and you haven't done those. You haven't even started, you know, towards moving in a direction to start doing those kinds of things. And so this is the kind of a role, you know, kind of very important role that international conferences can play when it comes to issues of justice and social justice in particular, and in climate justice, and that we get our voices amplified, we get to be heard, and we get to be given a platform. It's good that there are platforms where these issues are discussed, and we must be the ones that shape how those platform looks. And at this point in time, we have not really been able to shape those because these have become very exclusive and elitist spaces. And so it is important that as people, particularly as young African people, we start penetrating through you know, these obstacles that make these platforms elitist platforms, because the issues that we faced with are not only issues that elite people are faced with, it's issues that everyone is faced with. So it is only fair that everyone gets, you know, an equal enough chance and a fair enough chance to be able to say, these are the issues that I'm faced with, and these are the issues that my community is faced with, and I should be able to have a voice in saying, how do we deal with those issues? And just also remembering that at times in these conferences, false solutions, you know, things that masquerade as solutions, but we know are not actually real solutions, like this carbon capturing systems that have been in development for over 50 years, but have not been working. They're not viable enough. You know, so these things distract us from real solutions that we can be taking and that we should be taking. And it is voices like ours that then bring that to the fore and say, well, in saying you're trying to capture carbon dioxide, for example, and suppress it and store it underground, is not working. It is something that has not worked, and it still is not working. For over 50 years, it has not been working. Let us start looking at solutions that are viable and that are working right now. And that is to stop fossil fuels, because the fossil fuel industry is benefiting from giving us false solutions and distracting us from the real action that needs to be taken. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this conversation on the importance of on the importance of international conferences on issues of justice. Please join us on Wednesday for our dialogue, where we will be continuing this conversation, and we will be joined by 3 beautiful people who have experience in these conferences, and some of which will be joining COP28 this year, and some who have joined the Africa Climate Summit earlier in September this year. And we can have this conversation and try and shape how these platforms are supposed to look and how they can be used by communities, how they can be used by activists. Sorry, I'm just trying to go to the chat. The data link should be in the chat. Michelle, if it's not already, could you please share that, the link for the data? If you have any questions or any follow-ups, please don't hesitate to send us an email at education@africanclimatealliance.org, and we will try and respond as swiftly as we possibly can. And once again, for the groups that have not been able to access the link, please do send in your messages that you're sending to COP to education@africanclimatealliance.org so that we can upload them for you. The link for the data will be up in a second, and we should be able to provide you back with your data as soon as possible. Okay, just giving. Oh, I see a hand. Okay, Nkosnati, you can go.
Oh, Kulu, I'm on the issue of WhatsApp. Before we closing, ever since we started this year, I've been sharing my numbers on the chat so that I can be added on the WhatsApp community of the African ACAs. But now we're at the end now, up to so far. So it's a bit of a complaint. And so can you please assist me? How do I deal with that challenge? Because I sometimes miss out on some of the meetings because sometimes I don't get notifications or reminders. So if ever maybe I'm part of a WhatsApp group, I think it can be easier to deal with that challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Gosnat. Like you're saying, it's towards the end of the year now, but we will make sure that you are part of any WhatsApp groups that are there. But please, are you on the Facebook group? So if you're not, please just request to join the Facebook group. And then, because all of these links at times are sent there to join the WhatsApp or to join I don't know, I'm not sure if there is a Telegram or Signal group. But please keep an eye out on the Facebook group should the link be sent. But alternatively, please do send us an email at education@africanclimatealliance.org so that I can start it from my side, so that I know when we open for the year, I can then pass that on to the relevant people and they can add you to the group. The data link has been put up. I'm just going to resend it again. I have resent it again. That is the data link. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night further. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week.